Okay, cool. So we have an official debate happening. We have Azgerod, we have Footsoldier. For this debate, Azgerod's taken the position that belief, justified by its truth, is an airtight definition of knowledge. Footsoldier's taken the opposition. As always, when we base upon who concedes, if we don't get a vocal concession from either participant, put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can decide on who you think performed better overall in the debate. No time limit, no moderation. You can get started.
Okay,
All right.
cool. Asgard,
So
would you like to introduce the prop then, what you mean by this?
yeah, I'll do that. So yeah, I'm going to be defending the proposition, and the proposition is uh, that the following is an airtight definition of knowledge, belief justified by its truth. Um, so first of all, I want to explain kind of why I've chosen this particular definition and how it is distinct from the justified true belief definition. So I created my definition as an improved but very similar version of the justified true belief definition. And I think my definition lacks the problem that justified true belief does, or that justified true belief has. Um, and the problem with justified true belief is that it does not correspond correctly to our colloquial understanding of the word knowledge. There are some things which justified true belief would call knowledge that we would not want to call knowledge. And this problem is shown through the use of thought experiments called Gettier problems. And I'll give an example of one so that I can show why it is that justified true belief falls prey to it, while belief justified by its truth does not. So imagine you're looking at an object, and let's say it's 100 meters away from you, and all of your senses are concluding that it's a sheep. So you come to the belief that there's a sheep over there. And I would say that it's a justified belief because you can see a sheep. But let's say it turns out that in fact what you saw was just a fluffy white dog, but behind the dog there actually is a sheep. So, as we already agreed, it was justified to believe that there was a sheep over there. And indeed, now we know that there was a sheep over there. So our belief was a justified true belief. So under the justified true belief definition of knowledge, this would be considered knowledge. However, I hope we can agree that we wouldn't want to call that knowledge because our colloquial understanding of the word does not agree with justified true belief, that definition in this circumstance. And I think the reason for that is that the justification we had for our belief that there's a sheep over there has nothing to do with the reason why it is true that there's a sheep over there. Our justification was all about the appearance of this dog, whereas the reason that our belief was true was that there was a sheep hiding behind the dog. So I think that's why the JTB definition fails. It doesn't specify the relationship between the justification and the truth of the belief. It only says that they both have to be present. And this is where my definition comes in. So if we take knowledge to be belief justified by its truth, then we've specified the relationship between the justification and the truth. And I believe that that is the missing link here. So notice that under my definition, the Gettier problems would not be considered knowledge because while the beliefs are justified and true, the justification has no relation to the truth. So that's why I chose this definition, and that's what its relation to the justified true belief definition. Now, to return to my proposition, I want to explain what I mean when I say that the definition is quote unquote like airtight. And I basically mean that it's just a good definition. Um, so I guess that leads to the question, what would make a definition good? And I think that there are three criteria for a good definition. So first, the definition should not be so broad as to be meaningless. In other words, there must be some things that my definition would not consider to be knowledge. And secondly, the definition should not be so narrow as to be utterly exclusionary. So there must be some things that it does consider knowledge. And third and finally, the definition should correspond to our colloquial understanding of the word, and that's where the JTB definition fails. So let's start with the first criterion. So is my definition so broad as to be meaningless? So first of all, it says belief, and not all things are beliefs. Then, it stipulates that the belief must be justified, and not all beliefs are justified. Finally, it says justified by its truth, and not all justified beliefs are even true, let alone justified by their truth. So my definition is clearly not meaninglessly broad. So second criteria, is my definition so narrow as to be meaningless? Well, if you're in a similar situation to the Gettier problem, and you believed that you were seeing a sheep, but it turned out that it actually was a sheep, then your belief would be knowledge under this definition, because your belief was justified for the same reason that it was true. So clearly my definition is not so narrow as to be exclusionary. So finally, does my definition correspond to our colloquial understanding of knowledge? Well, the only way a question like that can really be answered is to in the sense of the scientific method, to just kind of test it on a whole bunch of examples and fail to falsify it, right? To show a bunch of examples where it does correspond. But I think that's a long enough introduction, so I'll see if Footsoldier can provide a counterexample. So go ahead.
Okay, man. Thanks for the introduction. So, yeah, that's all good. I agree on what you define as airtight. Apart from, I'd also take airtight to mean that there's not any major problems with it. So I'd say if I could show any major problems with your argument, and if I could also show that maybe it doesn't correspond, or what it implies doesn't correspond to the colloquial definition or the colloquial usage, or if it's overbroad, then these are the types of things I would see as the goalposts for the debate. I would,
Yeah,
I,
I very
I,
much agree.
yeah, sure. So I would sort of expect a concession if I was to able to compellingly show some of those issues of that nature. So,
Mhm.
your definition, belief justified by its truth, right? If we break this down into the sort of three components: belief, justifier, and its truth, we can
Mhm.
take an example such as belief. John believes that the earth is round. Justified because it's truth. It is true that the earth is round. So then we get John believes that the earth is round because it is true that the earth is round. So this is the first major problem, is the redundancy of it. So what you're saying is John thinks the earth is round because the earth is round. So this is one of the common issues when people have replied with new definitions to try and get around the Gettier cases. Um, People have there's been various sort of approaches to take, but this is one of the approaches which is considered unacceptable because it relies on circularity, it relies on a redundancy, right? So it's saying that the belief, you're basically just saying the belief is the same thing as the truth. So if you had direct access to the truth in the first place, then there would be no reason to have a belief about the truth or something. It would just be, you would just have direct access to it, so it would be unnecessary to have the belief in the first place. So this is the first major problem with your definition, which is redundancy. John believes that the earth is round because it's true that the earth is round. How do you know that? Well, he believes that the earth is round in virtue of the earth being round. And so
Right.
it's circular.
Shall we
This,
go over that point before we go on to the next one, or
yeah,
what do you
yeah,
think?
sure, yeah, we can do that then.
Okay. So I don't believe that belief implies knowledge, or sorry, I don't believe that belief implies truth, right? I believe that I think that belief implies like perceived truth, like you think it's true, but it doesn't. It's not necessarily actually true. And whatever way you decide what is quote unquote like objectively true can still be different from your belief, unless you have a particular definition of truth, which is just that which you believe, which is a particular definition, but it's not one that I don't think everybody holds. So I'm just saying that it is entirely possible for someone to say, think that that they have conclusively determined that something is true, and that's why they believe it, but it's not actually like metaphysically true, and so it wouldn't be considered knowledge.
Right, but your definition of knowledge
Mhm.
you can only say that you've got knowledge if you know that it's somehow metaphysically true, right? So,
No, no,
um,
no. I'm not saying if you know that it's somehow metaphysically true. I'm just saying it is knowledge if it is metaphysically true. I would
right,
actually say that under my definition, no one can ever know or even have a justified belief that they have knowledge about anything.
right. So the problem is that there's an epistemic irresolvability to any knowledge claim. So no one, under your view, no one can ever have any knowledge.
Um, yeah, I mean, generally, maybe. I mean, well, let's think. So I guess the maybe an example that I would give is like uh, you're doing like a math test or something, and you do one of the problems, and you haven't gotten your results back. You don't know if you actually did the question correctly, but you did it to the best of your ability, and you're pretty sure it's true, right? Uh, so that would be like um, a belief or whatever. And then afterwards, once someone came back and marked it, and you knew that this was like, oh, I actually did do this correctly, that would be the knowledge part. Now you know that you did it correctly. So like, if you imagine that like, I don't, not everybody thinks this way, but if you come to your beliefs through some kind of rule-based system, then the idea is that you try your best to actually use those rules properly, but you might fail, and you don't know whether or not you failed until there's some like verification that occurs at a later point. And
Right.
however that verification occurs, that would be when you have knowledge.
Right. So what you're saying is that all inductive claims can't be knowledge. Like all inductive beliefs could never be
Mm.
knowledge, and
Yes.
only deductively verifiable um, things can be knowledge. But then,
Yeah.
if you're gonna say something like that, then I could just invoke some sort of skepticism there. I could just uh, jump to a problem of induction and say, look, um, not even a problem of induction. I can just talk about sort of epistemological skepticism a bit more and say, well, how do you know anything is the case? How do you know when you get your exam paper back that you're not just like dreaming that you have you know, got the correct answer on the test? Or how comes you're not mistaken? Or how do you know that the person who marked it was not
Right.
mistaken? So, and then so it just goes back into some sort of recurrence, like what's the word? Recursion. It spirals off into recursion, right, of these layers behind it. How do you know that's the case? Well, the teacher said it. Or how do you know the teacher was correct? Well, we have to trust the teacher. Well, how can we trust the teacher? And then it,
Yeah.
it goes back. It's like, even if the teacher was correct, how we know that we didn't read it wrong? How do we know that we're not in a dream? How do we know that we're not a brain in a vat? Right. So if you're gonna
Mhm.
say deductive, you can only have deductive knowledge. Well, then all knowledge of deduction is subject to the problems of induction anyway, right? So then you're left
Right.
on your island of not having any knowledge again, right?
Hmm. So, like, first of all, I would take back a little bit what I said that you can only have deductive knowledge. I rescind that. So, if you have some kind of um, criteria for what you consider to be true, then you can have knowledge. You might not know whether or not you have knowledge, but you might have a pretty strong belief that you have knowledge because you're really sure that you've done your truth determination correctly. But yeah, you can never be absolutely certain that you have knowledge. I would grant that. I don't think that's a problem with my definition, though.
So you can't know if you have knowledge.
You can never be absolutely certain that you have knowledge. No, like you can feel very strongly or believe very strongly that you do, but no, I don't think you can be absolutely certain about like anything, let alone knowledge.
So you can't know if you know something.
Uh,
But if you can't know
Probably
if you
true,
know
yeah.
some if you can't know if you know something, then how do you know whether you know something or not? Like how do you know whether it's true or false, whether you know something which you know?
Right. I'm not saying that you necessarily can ever know that you know something. Yeah.
Right, so you can never know anything.
Well, no, that's not true.
Is that do you know that?
I, no, but I wouldn't claim to know it, but I strongly believe it, and I would uh, hope that you can see my reasoning and also agree that it's a justified belief, which may or may not be metaphysically true.
Do
So
you know anything? Can you make one? Can you say one single thing to me which you know?
again, like if in a strictly like absolute certainty sense, no. But I would say most people wouldn't be comfortable making absolute certainty claims about anything. Knowledge is not special to this, right? I can
Do you?
still make the statement in a casual conversation that I know something, and what I'm referring to is this definition, but I'm not like certain that I know it, but I think I know it.
Right, but do you? Are you certain that you think that you might know certain things?
No, I guess not. Like I don't think I'm certain about anything. Like
Yeah, but you're not even certain about the
yeah,
things that you are not certain about. So
yeah,
you've
that's right.
just backed yourself, you've painted yourself into a corner of complete sort of you can't know anything. You're completely unsure about everything. You painted yourself into a corner of skepticism with this definition.
Well, if by skepticism you mean that I can't be absolutely certain about anything, then yes, and I'm proud of it. Because I think it's untenable to say that you're absolutely certain about anything.
But you can't know a single fact. You can't even know whether you think you know something.
I can know something, right? It's just a fact. Whether or not I know something is just a fact. It's a fact of the matter in a sense, right? Like if I have this belief, okay, I think you'd grant that I can have a belief, and maybe we can even agree to that it can be justified. And whether or not it's knowledge is just a fact of the universe, which relates to the truth of the claim in an objective sense. So I can have knowledge, but I don't know that I have knowledge.
Who knows that you have knowledge or not? God?
I don't claim that there is a God, so perhaps no one does. But I'm just talking about if there was some knowledge to be observed, then this is what it would look like. And this is what we refer to when we talk about knowledge. Like, for example, I can talk about the definition of free will. It doesn't mean I have to hold that free will is actually anything.
Right, but it seems that the more that I push you, your quote unquote airtight definition means you can't actually know anything. And the only thing that you can possibly know, if true, is verifiable by no one. So no one knows if anyone knows anything, right? So
So
like your
to,
definition of
to, to be
knowledge
clear,
now.
like I do believe that you can know things, right? I just don't believe that you can, and perhaps you can even know that you know things. Actually, now that I think about it, it's just a fact of the matter. But I don't think anybody kind of should really be absolutely certain that they know something. Even any kind of recursive, like know that I know that I know that I know. It's not reasonable to feel like you're absolutely certain because that would be like a claim about some absolutely certain metaphysical truth or something. I don't think you should hold that.
You
But
know that you have hands.
uh, yes, I do.
You do know for sure that you have hands.
Yeah, I'll claim that.
Okay. So how do you know that?
Well, I have a set of rules that determines whether or not something's true, right? And one of those things is that if I sense it to be true, and I guess there's also a definitional thing here where I define this thing that I think I'm observing to be a hand or whatever, or it fits the definition of a hand. Those kinds of two things together, the observation linked with the definition of a hand, lets me say, I have a hand. I guess there's also a bit about what have means, but you get the idea.
Well, Mr. Batman can sense, feels, he knows that the Christian God exists. And according to what is the Christian God by his definition, and I guess
Yeah,
the definition of others, God does exist. So he
sure.
knows that God exists. So for your definition, uh,
Yeah.
God, he knows that exists. And if he knows, that means that it's true that exists because your definition says you can only know something if it's true. So your definition proves the existence of the Christian God.
Well, first of all, I don't think truth necessarily is something objective about the universe. It may be just that it is objectively true that he has performed the justification required in his own belief system to come to the conclusion that God is real. I'd say that
Wait,
that
wait,
would
wait.
be
You're
knowledge.
you're 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 equivocating now onto the classic JTB definition, right? So you're now going back to some sort of arbitrary justification. But no, your justification is the fact that it is true. It's
No, no, no,
actually
no, no,
true.
no. Sorry, sorry. I think we misunderstand each other. So, when I say true, I don't necessarily. I may have said this, and I apologize because I may have misspoken when I said that it was like a metaphysical truth. When I said it was a metaphysical truth, what I meant is that it's possible for it to just be true or not be true uh, in a sense that you've done your math correctly, like that you've done your belief justification correctly within the subjective rules of your own belief system. Whether or not you've actually done it correctly or not is what truth is concerned with. Whether or not you believe you've done it correctly is what belief is about.
Well, if you're allowing Mr. Batman to know that God exists, and you're allowing
Hmm.
me to know that God does not exist, then
Yes,
knowledge and truth, then it's simultaneously true and not true that God
yes,
exists, and simultaneously true and not true that God does not exist.
that's okay. Because as I say, I believe that truth is a subjective belief. Basically, it's something you hold to be true, right? You hold that uh, it is true to you that God is not real, or that you don't know that God's real, and it is true to Mr. Batman that he is real.
Right. So
And
then
like,
you've just introduced a
to be
further
clear,
problem.
in terms of like whether or not the definition that I have corresponds well to the colloquial sense, I would say that, well, people do believe or believe that they know or say that they know contradictory things. So I think that very well conforms to the colloquial sense.
Well, now you've got to the point where you're saying that truth is relative. But now,
Hmm.
if truth is just what you believe, if you just believe something and it's true by virtue of you just believing it, then your definition has got a
No,
further
it's
redundancy
not. No, no,
of
no, no. It's not
belief is
true.
just truth.
It's not true by virtue of you believing it. It's true by virtue of it actually being justified within your own system of belief, right? So you can think that you've done the math correctly in terms of, the whatever logical or other rules, whatever standards you have for truth. You may do those incorrectly, in which case it's just a belief and not a true belief, not knowledge. But if you've done your math correctly, then it is knowledge.
Right. So the thing is here, if you're just saying that if it coheres to your web of beliefs, then it's true, relatively speaking. So that justifies pretty much everything. It justifies the existence of UFOs in Roswell. It justifies the existence of God. It justifies the existence of the Christian God, of Zeus, of Allah, of every
Yeah,
single.
but
It justifies pretty much everything. It justifies the fact that Elvis. So it's true that Elvis is still alive, and it's also false that Elvis is still alive,
I'm not
depending on who you talk
making,
to.
again, I'm not making like metaphysical claims. I'm just saying that this is what people mean when they use the word, right?
Right. So if it coheres to your set of beliefs, then it's a belief. But you're saying no. If it coheres to your set of beliefs, it's not only a belief; it's true. So then,
Yeah, I'm
how could you
saying
hold a
I,
belief?
I'm
Can you
not.
tell me how you could hold a belief which is
Yeah,
incoherent with your set of beliefs and hold that as an actual belief?
right. So you slipped in something there that I don't agree with, which is that a belief is that which coheres to your other beliefs or your system of belief. I
You
believe that
said that.
that's what. No, I didn't. I didn't. I said that truth is what coheres with maybe your set of beliefs, and belief is just you thinking or having done your best to only reach claims which cohere with your system of beliefs, right? Again, it's the difference between doing your best on a math problem and actually it being the case that you've done it correctly.
Right, so your definition of truth has now become so bizarre that truth is relative. So it's not just a belief, but it's true that the Christian God does and does not exist. It's true that Elvis is and is not dead. It's true that Islamic God is true and not true at the same time. It's true that like all contradictions, any possible belief that people have, if it coheres
Mhm.
and they believe in it enough, it's somehow true in your system. So now truth is pretty much
No,
whatever anyone thinks, right? So
no,
it's now just
no,
become
no,
so
no.
ridiculous.
No, so I'm not saying that when somebody believes something, it becomes true. I'm saying when it actually coheres to your beliefs or to your system of belief, when it's actually reached in accordance with whatever rules you've determined, whatever standards you've determined for finding out what's true, then it is true, and then it is knowledge. However, belief is a weaker statement than that, which is just that you've done your best to try to apply those rules, but you may not have done it correctly, right?
Can you give an example of a belief
Yeah,
um, as being different from a truth in
yeah.
that the belief is something which they hold because it coheres to their set of beliefs,
I
but
didn't
the
say that.
truth is something. How is that different under your view?
So to be clear, I never said that belief is something that coheres to your set of beliefs, right? I said that about truth, and I am making a distinction between truth and belief. So clearly, I'm not saying that belief is that, right? I'm saying that belief is something that you've done your best to make sure that it coheres to your beliefs or to your system of belief and the rules thereof. But I'm not saying that it is something that actually coheres with your other beliefs, right?
All right. So
And
you're
so to
saying
give
that
you an example,
you could hold something which you're unsure whether it coheres to your set of beliefs or not. So you could be
even if you think
unsure.
you're sure, even if you think you're sure, right? Or you are sure in a psychological sense, it may be that you have done your math wrong. Once you set out some set of rules, maybe logical rules, in fact, for coming to truths, you may think that you've done them correctly and come to some conclusion which actually is not justifiable within that rule set.
Well, it's coherent to many people's sets of beliefs that Elvis is still alive. So therefore, it's true in this sense. In your sense, Elvis is
Yes,
still alive to them.
yes. Yeah.
Right. So now you've got a subjective coherentist theory of truth.
Well,
Um,
I didn't really, I was going with the coherentism thing, but really it's just any rule set, any standards that you have for determining truth,
well,
regardless if that's like
it seems like what
coherentism
you're
or
saying
something
is
else.
subjective coherentism because
Well,
it's
it's
true.
subjective. It's not necessarily just coherentism, but yeah.
Well, look, if Elvis can be alive for one person and Elvis is dead for another person, then it's so corresponding or cohering to their set of beliefs, and that's literally by definition subjective coherentism.
Well, again, you've put in the necessity there for it to be because it coheres to their beliefs. Some people do not make their belief system structured that way. For example, myself, I'm not a coherentist. However, I do have a set of rules and standards for reaching truth, and it is subjective to me, and what is true to me may not be true to, for example, a coherentist.
But you've just defined truth as such. So if you're defining truth as such, then you've simply defined it as subjective coherentism. And now you're saying that it might not be. Well, what is it
I'm
then?
not. I don't think it's subjective coherentism. I think it's subjective. I don't think it's coherentism. Because like there's other ways of structuring your beliefs that don't have anything to do with coherentism, right?
Right, so I don't think we're making progress on this particular point. I've pointed out that you
True.
now have a a subject relative conception of truth, and I'm
Yes,
still
it's subjective.
unsure. I'm still unsure how truth diverges from belief
Yeah,
in.
I'll give you. I'll state the generality again, and then I'll give you an example. So, uh,
Okay.
the difference is that let's say I have some set of rules that would lead me from belief to belief, or from axiom to belief, or something. If I actually do that process correctly, then I've reached knowledge. I may or may not know that it's knowledge, or believe that it's knowledge, or be justified in that belief, but it is knowledge nonetheless. However, if I've done the process incorrectly, according to the in a sense, objective set of rules that I've created and defined, then it's simply a belief and not furthermore knowledge. So to give you an example of this, we can go back to the example with the what's it called, the sheep, right? So you see a sheep off in the distance. Your set of rules indicates that yes, you can believe that something is true as long as it is yeah, something is true if you perceive it with your eyes and if it is also actually there, right? If something exists or something, if you can perceive it with your senses and it like actually exists in a metaphysical sense or something. I don't know. Let's say you went with that definition. You go over to this sheep, you think it's sheep beforehand, that's a belief, it's justified. you go over to it, and it is in fact a sheep. That is when it is true because it's fully um, satisfies your standards and your rules for determining truth. But if you simply um, looked at it and you thought, oh, well, that's a sheep, and then you went up to it and you saw, oh, it's actually just a dog, but there's a sheep behind it or something, then you would think, okay, well, it wasn't actually knowledge. It wasn't actually true because it didn't fully conform to the rules that I set out for myself. I thought it was. I didn't really know that there was a sheep behind it and actually a dog is what I'm looking at. So you applied your rules incorrectly in that case. So it would just be a belief.
So what you're saying is a belief is something that you think is true, but knowledge is something when you've verified your belief to be true.
Well, no, knowledge or truth is just the metaphysical, in a sense, fact that it is true. And by true, I mean that it is, it is in accordance or it follows the rules that you set out earlier. So because you set out the rules and defined them, and now they're in a sense objective, like the laws of logic are, there can be an objective fact about whether or not you have followed them correctly. And that fact of the matter is the truth or falsity of it, and therefore impacts the knowledge.
Right, so you've already said a few times that if it coheres to my set of beliefs that Elvis is alive, then it's true that Elvis is alive. So then what you're going to say is if I have a belief that Elvis is alive, and because it is true, subjective to my belief system that Elvis is alive, then I have knowledge that Elvis is alive. Now, that is an obvious case of not corresponding to the colloquial definition of knowledge. Because if you say that I have knowledge that Elvis is alive, you tell other people and they say, well, prove it, provide some evidence. And they're just going to say, well, it coheres to my set of beliefs. Then
Well,
they're
no,
just going to
they're
laugh.
not going to. Well, if they're a philosopher, they might say that, but really, they're just going to give some explanation for why they think it's true, and maybe they don't even
And no one's
know.
gonna find it true. Everyone's gonna say, "Well, you
That's
don't have
okay.
any knowledge of Elvis' life. You don't have any evidence for it. You don't have any
Yeah,
justification for." Like it's just at that
but that's
point,
fine because,
that's the
as I
biggest
said, I think
divergence. That's the biggest divergence from what people would consider knowledge that I could possibly offer you in this conversation. And you're saying that that's not problematic for your quote unquote airtight definition.
right. So you're saying because most people believe that knowledge is objective, and in this case, my definition of knowledge would lead to the fact that knowledge is not objective. That's a discordance or a dissonance or whatever.
Well, if you're going to go around saying that I have knowledge that Elvis is still alive, people or
Yeah,
anyone else that take any ridiculous shit like I have knowledge of this, right?
yeah,
People just going to say, well, no, you don't. Right, so
okay.
that is according to the colloquial understanding of knowledge, it just doesn't correspond at all.
No, that's not true. People have disagreements over what is knowledge all the time about what's true and what's not. That's not like at all contradictory. I'm not making statements like about what is true or what's not true. I'm just saying that this is what people mean when they claim to have knowledge, right? They're referring to this thing.
Right, but when we're actually going to assess whether it really is knowledge or not, then we have to appeal to some sort of external verification, right?
Yeah.
Which you've admitted potentially no one's in. Well, if God doesn't exist, you don't believe in God, so potentially no one is in a position to verify that independently. And we've gone through all of
Yeah,
the
and I
infinite
would,
regress of deductive problems.
separate from this conversation, like even if I'm just referring to the colloquial understanding of knowledge, and I'm not talking about this definition, I would say the same thing, that I personally don't believe that that anybody can really be absolutely certain that they know something or absolutely certain that something is true. Because our brains are just a bit too dumb for that. Like we don't have like 100% accuracy.
Right. Okay. So let's move in on to my second major objection. So form this definition to get around Gettier cases, but
Yeah.
it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how a Gettier type case would apply to this same definition. So if we imagine, like you were talking about math tests earlier, so just imagine
Yeah.
that John is taking a maths exam, and it's like multiple choice or something something and is copying all of his answers from the person sitting next to him, who's a genius and he's certain to get all of the questions right, and he does get all the questions right. Well, John knows every answer. He's got knowledge of every answer because he believes that they're true answers because they're the right answers because he knows that the guy next to him is genius and he's never gonna make a mistake. But he has no actual knowledge in the colloquial sense of any of the subject matter and forgets every answer after he copies it down. So nobody would say that John had knowledge of any of the answers, as he would fail the test if he repeated it 10 minutes later without cheating. So
Well,
he
this is a
copies down.
conflation.
Sorry.
So this is a conflation between
How?
his knowledge of the subject matter and his knowledge that the answers he's been given are correct, right? He doesn't
No,
have an
no, no. But
understanding of the
look,
subject.
if he gets a question come up in the test, he doesn't know it. He's got no knowledge of the answer. He looks over, he copies it. Well, that's the
Yeah.
true answer. He
Now
copies it
he
down. He's got the
does.
true answer. So then
Yeah.
he knows it. Then he knows the answer, right?
Yeah.
And then the second
That's
answer,
not
he
in.
looks across, then he knows the answer. And the third one he looks across, then he knows
Yeah.
the answer. So he knows all of the answers on the test. But then, if he's asked to
Yeah.
repeat the test 1 minute later, without they notice, oh, you've been copying, repeat the test without copying. He doesn't know any of it. So that
That's a
couldn't
problem with
possibly.
memory, not knowledge, not my definition of knowledge. He
Yeah,
knew it,
yeah,
but then
but
he
this
forgot the
this is
information.
dude, this is at odds with the
No,
colloquial
it's
definition
not.
of knowledge. Because
It's not.
someone claiming, if you said, "Oh, do you have knowledge of the questions on the test? Like, do you know the test? Like, can you pass this test? Do you know enough to pass this test?" And it says, "Yeah," and he gets all the questions right because he copies it down. And then they figure, "Oh, hold
Yeah.
on, he was cheating." And then he goes and does it again, and he doesn't know any of the thing. He gets all of the questions wrong.
Yeah.
And they're
He
going to say,
no
"Well, you didn't have
longer
any knowledge
knows
of
it.
it. You didn't have any knowledge at all, dude.
Yeah. He
Never had any knowledge to begin
no.
with."
He didn't have. Okay, but this is just a conflation between like
It's not.
him knowing, understanding the subject matter, and him knowing at the time that he looks over and truly believes that the person sitting across from him knows their shit, and he sees the answer. He then, for the period of time that he remembers that information, knows under his own subjective way of assessing truth that it's
This
true,
is
and so he does have
this
knowledge.
is
However, afterwards, once he's forgotten it, he does not know. I think if you ask anybody in the colloquial sense, like, okay, um, you have like some AI or something, right, that spits out true facts all the time, and it's been verified to the gills, and it spits out some mathematical truth or something, and then somebody's like, oh yes, I know that this is true, right? They would still say, yeah, I know it's true because it came from the omnipotent AI brain. However, 20 minutes later, they forget it. It doesn't mean that it wasn't knowledge at the time. It's just not knowledge now.
right. That you're just changing the hypothetical. I've given you a Gettier case where the colloquial definition or colloquial sense or understanding of knowledge does not
Yeah.
correspond to John
No,
cheating in the test.
so I'm not just trying to give you like some example that does work. I'm trying to compare these two and show that both work because of the similarities between them. Because the only
No, no,
difference
no,
here is
no.
that
Just talk about the example I gave you.
okay, so I believe that like in this case, this person thinks the John, I guess, believes that the person to his right is like some omnipotent, intelligent person who knows for certain the answers. So they've gotten the answers from this. Yeah, I know that it's true because for
Does
whatever
John
reason,
does John have any knowledge of any of the answers?
yeah, he does. He have is a precise knowledge to his own way of thinking of the particular answers that have been given. He doesn't know why they're true, but that doesn't matter. He still knows that it's true.
So he has knowledge of the answers on the test, but
Yeah,
then when they discover he's cheating and
yeah,
they say, okay, don't cheat anymore, we're going to put up, someone's going to make sure you don't look over and cheat, and he does the test again, he has no knowledge of the answers anymore. So if he only has knowledge when he cheats, but then he has absolutely zero knowledge when he
yeah,
doesn't look over and cheat, then you're saying that
yeah.
he still has
So
knowledge, or he had
I
knowledge.
no, yeah, he had knowledge when you just said he had knowledge. You said he had knowledge of it, and then later he didn't. That's what I'd agree with.
No, I'm saying you're saying that he had knowledge of it, right? I don't think
Yeah.
that's knowledge.
Okay.
That doesn't
Sure. Yeah.
that
No, I
doesn't
agree.
correspond to the colloquial understanding of knowledge. Like
It
if you
does
say,
though.
"Oh, I cheated on the test," and at the time that I cheated, I had full knowledge of the answers. Like, but everyone's just going to say, "No, you didn't have any knowledge." Like that. This
No,
is what the Gettier
again,
cases are
we're
actually
just
getting at.
conflating between. This is about the natural language imprecisions here, because there's two different contextually based meanings for the term knowledge, right? One of which is just that I know that this thing is true right now. Like I know it's true. I'm very, very confident to a certain degree in my in my belief in it, right? And the other is like this understanding or this long-term again like memorized knowledge or fact. That's like they're two different kinds of knowledge that people refer to. And I would say that my definition refers more to the first kind, just the fact that at any point in time you hold some information and believe it to be true in a very strong sense. Uh, that's the colloquial meaning that I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, but you do understand that Gettier cases, like in the Gettier cases, the examples, the whole point of it is to show that someone arrives at the correct answer, but
Yeah,
with a justification, but the justification seems to not be the one that would be considered normally, right? It's just like a happy accident in a way, right?
yeah,
That's
exactly. It's an accident, but in this case, there is no accident. You believe that it's true because you believe that the guy to your right has all these correct, certain answers, and he's a genius. And that is, in fact, why you got the answer correct. That's why it's true because this person like knew their shit, and
right, but
that's why your belief is.
The point of Gettier cases that you don't have any real true knowledge, right? It just happened to be the case. And in this example that I'm offering you with the maths exam, you don't have any true real knowledge. It just happens to be that you've just copied the answers. So
No, you
I
do
don't.
have like
You're
there's two
just all you're just
separate.
saying is, oh, well, you know it in the moment because you're copying the answers. Well, that's not what most people mean by knowledge. If people say, oh, well, you had knowledge to pass the math test. You took the test and you had knowledge of it and you passed. You said, yes, I had full knowledge at the time of copying the answers. Then people are just going to
So
be like, well, that's not knowledge
so what you're
of the
saying,
test.
okay, so what you're saying, because I disagree with you that when you have knowledge at one point or where you know have knowledge under my definition at one point, and then later you don't have knowledge under my definition. I disagree that that implies that you don't have knowledge in the colloquial sense. So let me try to convince you of that by way of a comparison or even just a different example where you have information from an artificial intelligence, right? You look at it, you read off the information, you know that it is true. You could use it in like a governmental plan even. It would be very, very verified and people would agree that it's a good source of information and you could say reasonably that you know it. And then 20 minutes later, because you didn't memorize the numbers, you don't know what it is anymore.
Yeah, but
In fact, I think
no one's gonna call it right. So if I just get my phone out and I do a really long calculation on my phone that I've just looked up like two
okay.
numbers and I need to multiply them or something or divide them, and I could never
Mm,
do it in my brain. And if someone says, "Oh, so you know the answer," I'll be like, "Yeah, well, I sort of I've seen the answer, so I know the result, but I have no knowledge of
exactly.
like, I have no knowledge of
Yeah,
how I
but
got
those are two different kinds of knowledge. One is a knowledge of like the mathematical methodology or a skill with this, and the other is knowledge of a number being true based on like the numbers that you put in, right? It's just you know that that is the correct answer given the inputs that you put in. Those are knowledges of two different propositions.
Right, so the second the calculator or I make a mistake on the calculator or something, I repeat it, and I don't know until I do it again, and then I can see the answer. But I don't really have knowledge. I don't have true knowledge of how to do any of this. The answer just appears, I accept it and write it down, right? I'm just trusting it, right? I don't have knowledge that this is true. I couldn't if I did 5 + 5 on the calculator and then I verified it myself. I knew how to do addition, and I was like, yes, it's 5 + 5 is definitely 10. Then everyone would agree that
Sure.
I have knowledge of it. But no one's going to agree that if I do no one's going to agree that I have knowledge of like the digits of pi to like 30 digits if I have to look at a chart and then tell you. No one's going to say, oh, well, when he looks at the
No,
chart, he's got knowledge in
no.
that moment. No,
But
people are going
these
to
are
say,
two
no, he
different
doesn't know.
claims.
He doesn't know it, so he has to look.
So these are two different like facts that you may or may not know. One is like I no, they're just different times at which you're describing it. But like as I say, it's a difference in the sense in which people mean knowledge. In one sense, as I say, they're just talking about right now. Yeah, no, I'm certain that this is the right answer because I got it out of my calculator. Yeah, I know. And then the other sense is that like I have knowledge of it. That's a different kind of uh, a different kind of colloquial meaning.
Right. So I think we've explored enough territory now to
Sure.
demonstrate that your definition is not airtight.
I don't
Um,
think so.
so we can go to a vote because it doesn't look like you're going to concede, despite the obvious evidence on the table that it's not airtight. So we can say, um, under your view, that someone has knowledge of 30 digits of pi because they have to look it up on the chart, and when they look it up on the chart, they've got knowledge of it, but actually they don't have any knowledge at all of it. Until he's just like literally, oh, he knows 30 digits of pi. How's he know? Well, he looks up on the chart. According to you, that's an airtight um, definition of knowledge. You also say that you, or that's just I've given you an example of how it doesn't get around Gettier cases with the mass tests, and then it got even more bizarre with you saying that someone has knowledge when they look up the digits of pi. He knows it because he's looked it up on the like, and then uh, you can't, under your view, you can't actually know anything for sure unless you somehow like appeal to God, which you don't think exists, because you can't. So you can't actually know anything for sure unless you're talking to me and saying, "Oh no, well, actually, truth is relative. So if it coheres to your set of beliefs, then you can know. So you can have knowledge that Elvis is alive, and other people can have knowledge that Elvis isn't alive, and that doesn't correspond to our understanding of what knowledge is whatsoever in the colloquial sense. If someone wants to say, "Oh, well, I know that I don't just think that Elvis is alive. I know that Elvis is alive. I've got knowledge of it," and then that just doesn't correspond to the colloquial sense at all. And yeah, you can't know anything without the independent verification unless you're using that weird sense about Elvis is alive and you can know that. So it doesn't correspond. It's overbroad in the sense of Elvis, and it's too narrow if you're going to use your other idea of it, in that you can't actually know anything at all. And yeah, and then so the problems with it that you raised at the start that would be a defeater for it being airtight was overbroadness. I've given you example. Underbroadness. I've given you example. Doesn't correspond to the colloquial definition. I've given you multiple examples. So that satisfies, and I've got further problems with it. The logical redundancy of saying that I believe the world is flat and I know the world is flat because the world is flat. um, so I have attacked it successfully with convincing counterexamples in 4 different categories. You're not going to concede. So then we just have to put it to a vote. So that's my closing statement. If you'd like to go ahead for your closing statement, and then we'll put it to votes.
Sure. So I think that most of the arguments here come from a disagreement about what the colloquial sense is, essentially, where Footsoldier would say that um, when if you know something at a certain point, you can't say that you know something, a fact at a certain point if you had to look it up, but you don't have this long-lasting retention of the knowledge if you don't have an understanding of it. And I would disagree with that. As I've said, I think that people do say, I know, oh yes, I know that this is the first 30 digits of pi. I won't know it in 30 seconds, but I know it right now. The other sense is that you wouldn't say, the other criticism Footsoldier made is that you wouldn't say that it's knowledge for someone to say, like, oh, I know that Elvis Presley is alive. But I would argue that uh, that it's actually like kind of tautological almost that it is in the colloquial sense because people use it in that sense all the time. People say, I know that Elvis Presley is alive. Other people would disagree with them that they have that knowledge, but we're not talking about some like objective truth or something. I'm just saying that, yeah, many people do treat knowledge as though it is subjective. So it doesn't really matter what my opinion on it is. That's how people talk about it. Um, so I don't think it's overbroad because, as I say, I think that those circumstances that he would call uh, not knowledge, that my definition would call knowledge, are indeed knowledge, and we haven't reconciled this disagreement really. I don't think that it is too narrow because it is not true that it is that you cannot know anything. I've said this several times. It is simply a fact of the matter whether or not you know something. Somebody who said, I know that Elvis Presley is alive may be right or wrong depending upon their subjective methods of coming to truth. If they are correctly following the rules that they've defined for coming to truth, then it would be knowledge. And I think that's kind of enough of an example to show that yes, you can have knowledge of something. What I did concede earlier, and what I would still hold to be true, is that you cannot be certain that you know something, because as I've said, the fact of the matter, whether or not it's true or not, is really dependent upon like a metaphysical fact. So I'd agree you can't know for certain, or you can't be absolutely certain that you know something. It still can be possible in a metaphysical sense that you do have knowledge of it. And I would argue that in general, separately from this definition. And so I think it's kind of irrelevant to whether or not the definition is accurate to the colloquial sense. But I've got to say something at the end here, because to be perfectly honest, I found a flaw with my own definition, which is that I say justified by its truth, which is an imprecision. It's not mapping what I actually have been talking about this whole time. So like a justified by its truth would be that somehow you are referencing the truth of the matter when you are when you are coming to your belief, right? But that would require some like metaphysical thing to occur before it would actually before you could even believe anything. Whereas what I mean to say, and what I should say, perhaps for a future debate, I don't know, is that a good definition would be belief that is belief where the justification for the belief is strongly related to or is the same as the reason for the belief being true in a metaphysical sense. That's kind of what I've been talking about, and it's not quite what I said. So in that light, I have to concede the proposition. But yeah, anyway.
Sure, man. Well, good that you conceded at the end. Then don't think we need to put it to vote. But I was attacking the proposition as written. So if it's like some other thing, then I'll have to go away and think about what that is, and then maybe we can debate again. But yeah, I think if we were to put it to vote anyway, I think most people would agree that it's sort of crazy town territory anyway.
Maybe,
But
maybe.
but,
Who knows?
but yeah, man. Okay, so if you concede, I guess we don't need to put it to vote. So yeah, nice one. Good for the intellectual honesty there. And
Yeah, thanks.
Stone, I guess.